Glad to have everybody joining. We still have some folks coming in, but I just want to say Happy New Year and welcome everyone to the North Carolina Botanical Gardens virtual Lunchbox Talk program. And this is the first one of 2021. We're looking forward to the ones to come as well. And I'm Joanna Massey-Lalikas. I oversee the education department at the North Carolina Botanical Garden in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We want to thank you for joining us virtually today, what started out as a snowy morning here in central North Carolina. And today we're bringing you Carol Price, who will be talking to us about a coastal project that's focused on the crystal skipper and its habitat conservation. Our gardens are open, so if you live in the area, we hope you'll come visit us. We're open Tuesday through Sunday for the public. You are coming into a Zoom webinar, know that your video is turned off and your audio is muted, but we are recording this session and we'll be sharing the recording with registered participants afterwards. And if you remain in the webinar, we take that as your consent to being recorded. We hope you'll join us for future virtual Lunchbox talks and other programs we have happening this spring, virtual in the garden and others. Please check out the link in the chat to register. And we also want your feedback on this program. So for those who are on a computer, at the end of the program, you'll have pop up in a browser window a survey. So please fill that out. It'll also come to you in an email after the program. So David Michaud is my partner in moderation today. We'd like to know where you're coming from today, where you're joining us from. So if you could just select the radio button for your response and we'll share the results momentarily. And if you're not from the Triangle area, if you could let us know where you are joining us from in the chat. I'd love to share with the group who all we have with us and let our Carol know who we have with us too. So we have Chapel Hill, Rock Hill, South Carolina, Lexington, North Carolina, Morehead City, Emerald Isle. So we have some folks from down your way, Carol. Anybody else? I think we're ready to share the results. We have a lot of folks that are outside of the Triangle, but in North Carolina, and a few that are out of state. So thank you all. We're really excited to have all of you with us today. Just to introduce our guest here, Carol Price is a conservation biologist from the North Carolina Aquariums. In this role, she develops, conducts, and oversees research and field work that aims to protect species and habitats of high conservation need. Her work reflects the commitment of North Carolina's 3 aquariums and their educational peer to promote appreciation and conservation of the diverse natural resources of our state's oceans, estuaries, rivers, streams, and other aquatic environments. She's also an instructor for the NC State University Semester at CMAS program, teaching marine conservation biology every spring. I think she was teaching this morning, weren't you, Carol? And throughout the year, she provides opportunities for students to delve into independent research programs related to these aquarium research priorities. She says that growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, instilled in her a strong connection to the ocean, leading to her lifelong dedication to protect coastal biodiversity. She has a special interest in understanding the linkages and networks that shape and support healthy ecosystems. And when she's not working to protect the planet, she uses her superpowers as a soccer mom and training her dog to locate her tortoise, which is so fun, knitting, gardening, learning new songs on her guitar, and playing board games for grown-ups. She has her PhD in fisheries science from Oregon State University, a Master of Science in Aquaculture, Fisheries, and Wildlife from Clemson University, and Bachelor of Science in Marine Science from the University of South Carolina. You'll also see with us today Mike Kuntz, the North Carolina Botanical Garden conservation ecologist and a team member on the Crystal Skipper project. He's joining us as a guest panelist and will be available also to support on the Q&A. So Carol and Mike, we're really grateful for you joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you, and you can share your screen when you're ready. And I'll ask you unmute, and we're ready to go.
Started by unmuting. Thank you, Joanna and David, for all of your technical support, and of course for the invitation to speak today. I'm really excited for that invitation. And you guys have been great at organizing this. Just kudos for just making this so easy. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen. And if somebody could give me a thumbs up, either Joanna or David, that you're seeing the right screen. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started then. So I'm Carol Price. I am primarily the conservation coordinator at the North Carolina Aquariums, but as Joanna mentioned, I also have this other opportunity to teach and do research and engage interns in research through North Carolina State University Center for Marine Sciences and Technology here in Morehead City. So today I want to talk to you about one of my very cool projects, Skippers in the Dunes, about a project that supports this endemic butterfly that you can see here, this little brown guy here in the middle of the screen. He doesn't perhaps look like much, but he is very, very special. Trying to figure out which button I have to push. There we go. Okay, so a little bit of basic background on the crystal skipper. In the top left or top right hand side, you can see what this little butterfly looks like. Fairly nondescript, except for those beautiful white crystal white dots along the wings, and sort of a little bit of dusting of that sort of crystal-y looking powder on the side. This is a female. You can tell by the sort of larger abdomen. And even though people had seen this skipper around for a while, it wasn't until fairly recently that it was recognized as its own special species, and more importantly, that it was endemic to just a very small part of North Carolina. So by endemic, what we mean is that it occurs nowhere else on the planet. So if you want to see a crystal skipper, you have to come to Bogue Banks. That stretches from about Fort Macon State Park at sort of the north and east end of its range, all the way down to Hammocks Beach State Park, which is sort of the south and western end of its range. So it's only about 50 kilometers, 3,300 hectares. That's about 8,000 acres. And for those of you who are familiar with Bogue Banks, the crystal skipper's habitat overlaps significantly with our own, and a lot of activity out on these barrier islands. And even more importantly, the butterfly isn't found just anywhere on the islands. It relies on a very narrow piece of our islands, and that is on the ocean side where the dunes are, behind the first line of dunes, in that sort of secondary, in that swale section behind the dunes and into the secondary dune line, is the only place that this skipper can be found. So you're not going to find it on the sound side, just in that dune area. And if you're familiar with sand dunes, it's about where you stop seeing the sea oats. So the sea oats will sort of grow on that sort of the dune, the ocean facing dune, and then right behind that where the sea oats drop off is sort of where you'll start to see the skipper habitat. And that's because they need one plant specifically to persist, and it is called Seaside Little Bluestem. Fortunately for the skipper, Seaside Little Bluestem is an extremely common dune plant all along, not just in Bogue Banks, but all along dune lines and in other coastal areas of North Carolina. So that's a good thing. It relies on a very common species. Why does it rely on this species? Well, why does it rely on this one little grass? It's important for many parts of the crystal skipper's life cycle. So I'm going to go through that for you very quickly so you can kind of get an idea about this relationship between the crystal skipper butterfly and this plant. So crystal skippers emerge in about mid-April. They come out, they might feed a little bit, but their main goal when they hatch is to mate. And so they will mate in the dunes and lay eggs. And they only lay their eggs on one plant. You can guess which one that is. That's right, Seaside Little Blue Stem. And that's what their egg cases look like. Once those eggs hatch and they form caterpillars, the first meals of those caterpillars, possibly the only meals of those caterpillars, is also Seaside Little Blue Stem. Once they grow large enough, they will form a cocoon. I'm not really sure if they lay those or if they'll place those on plants other than blue stem. I'm not really sure about that. That's another thing I need to learn about this species. Always lots to learn. And then once they emerge as a skipper, they move on to using other plants in the dunes as nectar sources. The really cool thing about the skipper is, as I mentioned, you'll start to see skippers first in April. They will go through this reproductive cycle, and then you will see these that hatch out come and hatch out in about mid-July. They will go through this exact same process and lay eggs, but those eggs will sit over winter and they don't hatch out until the following April. So you have what's called 2 flight periods where you see butterflies, skippers, but they're actually different animals. And when you see them in April, they are actually the grand butterflies of the ones from the previous April. So that's kind of an interesting thing about this species. As you can imagine, there's a lot of reasons for why this species might have a hard time persisting on a barrier island. One of these is habitat loss. So I wanted to just show you 2 pictures of the same spot. This is in Salter Path, about halfway down Bogue Banks. And there's some historical imagery that the North Carolina Department of Transportation has available. And you can see sort of this exact same shoreline here coming down, up, and so forth. This is what we see now. In the past, you will see that there was a lot of maritime forest on the sound side, which is in the upper parts of the pictures, and lots of great dune habitat in the bottom of each of those pictures on the ocean side there. Obviously, by the time 2019 and currently rolls around, you can see that a lot of that dune habitat is still there. There's still certainly some there because we have setbacks in place and places that haven't been developed. But you can see that there's been a lot of encroachment on that crystal skipper, that narrow band that they need. Even in places where there is some habitat left for them, in a lot of cases that habitat can be quite degraded. It's sometimes not in great shape. That might be because there's a house sitting on it or a parking lot. But even where there is vegetation, sometimes that is now lawns that have been landscaping and so forth that have been put in place where the plants aren't suitable to support skippers. Another problem is invasive species. One of the things we've noticed is that centipede grass can grow into the dunes and sort of choke out some of the native species. And then we also have other invasive species like beach vitex that are a problem in some areas. So the skippers, even where there is habitat, it might look like it could support butterflies, but it's actually not in good enough shape to do so. We have a lot to thank to one person for really advancing this, the crystal skipper conservation, and that's Dr. Allison Leidner. She was a graduate student working with Dr. Nick Haddad in the mid-2000s, and she did her research on this butterfly. So she spent a lot of time in the dunes. She would mark these butterflies, recapture them to understand where they were flying, how they were using the habitat, and just to document a lot of things that were unknown about this species. Based on her work, she came up with a model, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the next slide, called the Stepping Stone Conservation Model for this species. But her other really important thing that she did is because of the specimens she was able to collect and then submitting those for genetic analysis, she was actually able to document that this was in fact a new species that was endemic to this this little section of Bogue Banks, and it was not just a small or subpopulation of a very common skipper species, perhaps that was also found in other places and on the mainland. So that really put this butterfly on the map. So what do I mean by this habitat stepping stones conservation model? Some animals need long, big, either large tracts of land or corridors of intact habitat to make sure that animals and also genes, of course, can flow between, population sites, between habitats. Some species are not able to persist in the way that we think the crystal skipper is going to be able to, and that's called a stepping stone model. So what I mean by that is that here we have Fort Macon State Park. That is a really big chunk where we know we have a healthy butterfly population there. And then we have some spaces that don't look very good. But here where you see these circles are places where we think that there is good, suitable habitat. That means it's got seaside little bluestem, it's relatively undisturbed, and it has some, maybe hopefully some nectar plants to support the population, and that these butterflies can actually fly in between these places, right? So this is what we mean by a stepping stone model, that we don't have to protect every square foot of dune in able to support the this population of skippers, that as long as they have these little pieces that they can move between, that there's a chance for them. So, full disclosure, I sort of meant to say this earlier. You heard Joanna talk about my background. So I started out in marine science and ended up working in fisheries. At no time did she mention the word botanist or entomologist. So that's because I am not an expert in butterflies or in plants, and certainly not in dune plants. So you might wonder, well, how did I end up doing this project, working for an aquarium as a fish biologist, marine scientist? Well, I had heard about Allison's, at that time she was Allison, she wasn't Dr. Leidner yet. I had heard about her work with this species. It's a bit of a local, sort of a local legend about this really cool butterfly that we have named the crystal skipper. And so when I first started working for the aquarium, I heard that, so she had graduated, left town. She now works for NASA in Washington, D.C., but I heard that she was in town. And I wanted to learn more about this butterfly project and how, what she had found, and just kind of touch base with her. And so I called her and we decided to get together for a walk on the beach in 2017. She showed me her sites. There were skippers out. She showed me all these cool flowers and these dunes, and she just told me the whole story of this butterfly. And I was just transfixed by this. I mean, it was just such a great story. I was really honest with her. I said, look, this isn't something maybe I can do by myself, but, maybe if I can get a student interested, I can start helping to answer some of the questions that you still have left from the work that you did here. And so she agreed to serve as an advisor to me, and I agreed that I would try to recruit a student. And I did. I was able to get an extremely motivated North Carolina State University student intern for my very first semester at CMAST when I was teaching there. His name's Ian Grace, and a little bit more about Ian later. And so I had the student, and so I was like, well, I guess I gotta, live up to my promise. And so took a deep breath, I took a dash of courage, and Ian and I started into working on this project. So the very first thing, and I want to say for Ian. He had to do so much of this work on his own. He was amazing. He just worked so well independently. He was very responsible and go-getter. So, but one of the things he first did was he identified 8 sites along bog banks where he was going to conduct plant surveys, because we wanted to know, where do we have good populations? Where do we have good stepping stones of seaside little bluestem that for this population? And so again, sort of the same map here, Fort Macon up here, Bear Island, which is part of Hammock Beach State Park. And then where you see these push pins are those 8 sites that we selected. This is called the West End or the Point in Emerald Isle. We have a site in Salter Path here. Another site, we call it's near the Baptist Children Home property, and so we call it the Baptist site. This is a skate park, so skateboarding park in Atlantic Beach. There used to be a big Food Lion there. Just to orient you, this is where the Atlantic Beach Bridge is that comes across. And then again, this is Fort Macon. So we wanted to use those 8 sites because those were sites that Dr. Leidner had sampled, as well as another person in Dr. Haddad's lab, Heather Caton, had also been monitoring just for butterflies. And so we wanted to be able to, at some point, link up what they had found with the work that we were doing so that it would be relevant. So at each of those 8 sites, Ian established a boundary around what we thought would be suitable, look like where butterflies could happen. So we know they're not going to be in parking lots or in the forest. And so he sort of excluded those areas. And then within those areas that looked like they had sort of that low grassy scrubby vegetation, he used Excel to generate 20 random points, which would serve as where he would do plot surveys for vegetation that skippers needed. We went super high tech on this. This is, yes, a PVC square. It is a 1 meter PVC square, which he would take to each of those 20 locations. He would toss it in the grass, and then he would do a very simple survey. Ian was also not a botanist or an entomologist. In fact, his main interest was in deep sea ecology. So we had to make sure that we kept this survey rather simple so that he could learn what he needed to do, learn what he needed in order to do this project. But he couldn't spend his whole semester learning, dune plant identification. So one of the ways we simplified this was just to have him identify the key species that he needed. And then in his surveys, just focus on, within that meter plot square, what percentage of it was covered with seaside little bluestem and a couple of other common plants. And I'm going to show you now, this is what his data sheets look like. So you can see on the green column is just those 20 plots that he's found for each, within each site. And then the percent of bare ground, the percent of seaside little bluestem, a couple of known nectar plants, morning glory and thistle, and then some other dune vegetation that we know is native dune vegetation to the best degree that he could identify it. So he felt like he could identify smilax, and he sort of had an idea of what sort of beech and panic grass might look like. And so again, we needed to keep it simple and within what he could actually identify. And so for each site, then he would just come up with an average of the bare ground that was present and then these plants. So this is what he found. So this is a summary of his data across all of those 8 sites. So on the left side here, you see here are the Fort Macon sites, and then the Bear Island, which is the other state park site. And you can see that they have really high levels, 40% to 50% of each of those plots had seaside little bluestem in it. That's pretty high. Some bare ground, also what you would expect inside of a dune. And then a nice assortment of those other important grasses and plants. So the Seaside Little Bluestem is this light blue. The bare ground is this orange color. Those are the two really important colors to focus on. What we found is that there were two sites where we had really low coverage of Seaside Little Bluestem. That's the skate park. And then also this site, which we just nicknamed Baptist, relatively low. They also had sort of high levels of, bare area, but still had some other good native vegetation there. The other site that also gave us worry was at the point right here, but this was private property. And so we were a little bit limited on our access there, whereas this site, we had landowner permission to work there, as well as at the skate park. And so what we had was left over from a previous project. We had some seeds that had been planted out for just Seaside Little Bluestem. So we knew that we had an opportunity to do some habitat restoration in terms of planting some Seaside Bluestem at these locations. We had about 1,000 plants to work with. And so we decided, Ian decided that we were going to focus our restoration efforts at this Baptist and skate park sites. So Ian got additional funding support to work through the summer on this from Dr. Haddad. Ian is this young man here in the brown shirt with the blonde hair. You can see him carrying trays of Seaside Little Bluestem that were grown out at a nursery, at a local nursery here. Ian also enlisted help. We knew that we couldn't plant all these by ourselves. And so he reached out to a whole bunch of people and asked for volunteers to come and help plant these plants at these two sites. And so what we ended up with was a really nice mix of aquarium employees. That's me here in this blue shirt and the funny straw hat. Ian, some other summer interns that I had at the time that were helping me out, working with me in the aquarium. This is Heather. So she came from Dr. Haddad's lab. And then we also had a really special group that joined us, and that was the Carteret County Master Gardeners came out and helped with this. They were really excited to come and do this, and we were really happy to have them out there. I was even able to enlist this guy who at the time was, I think, 14. That's my son. So I was very excited to have him be able to come out and help. And so you can actually see here in these pictures how these bare spots in the ground. So the picture on the bottom right is at the Baptist site. The other three are at the skate park, but you can really see how much bare ground there is at some of those locations. So we were really excited. I went out a few times. I checked on the status of those plants. Everything was looking pretty healthy. The plugs that we put in looked really great. And then there was a hurricane. It caused a lot of damage. The picture that you're seeing there is some before and after images on Bogue Banks. And the before picture being on the left, the after picture being on the right. And you can see that between the washover of the dunes and the wind and the storm action, that there was a lot of scour that happened in the primary dune areas there, which is where the skipper lives. And so I was really concerned about the impact that this was going to have on the skippers, and especially on the plants that they relied on. So here I am, it's fall. I have no students at this time. I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to do. I'm really worried about this butterfly. And then I got really, really, really lucky because I was joined, a friend of mine reached out, Gloria Putnam, who's with North Carolina Sea Grant, reached out to me because she had kind of heard about this project that Sea Grant had supported in the past with Dr. Leidner. And Gloria was the program lead for the Coastal Landscapes Initiative, and that is a program hosted by Sea Grant that focuses on the value of healthy coastal ecosystems and landscapes, and engaging private property owners in using or converting to native natural plants to promote healthy coastal ecosystems. And so she was looking, I mean, she does a lot of work. She does a lot of stuff outside of the skipper work, but she just saw a lot of correlation between the work that I was trying to do in terms of restoring some native dune plants for biodiversity, and her program, which also aims to do that, to support healthy dune coastal landscapes. So I was very, very grateful. She reached out to me, and she also then brought on another really important person to this project, which is Mike Kuntz, who is the conservation botanist, ecologist at the North Carolina Botanical Gardens. So he also came on as a collaborator on this. And Gloria and Mike and I worked together to get a proposal into Sea Grant for some funding to support the next steps for this project that we thought needed to happen. And so the first thing that we did is in April 2019, we redid the surveys that Ian had done. And so if you look at the graph here, here again are our different sites: 2018 sampling done by Ian, 2019 sampling done by us, by the Coastal Landscapes Initiative, North Carolina Aquariums Partnership. And really what you can see is a lot more blue, which in this graph is the amount of bare ground. So at virtually every site, with the exception of Fort Macon, this one part of Fort Macon, there was a lot more bare ground and a lot less seaside little bluestem around. So my concerns about the storm having an impact were borne out by the data that we collected. We had a lot of help with these surveys. So Sea Grant, we were also joined not only by Gloria, but also by Sarah Spiegler, who came and helped. The North Carolina Aquarium staff came and helped. Dale Suter from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service joined us. Heather came back and joined us. So we were able to do all of this work rather quickly. It took Ian a whole, better part of a semester to do this, and we were able to do this in just a few days. And
Carol, if we could pause there, we have had a couple of questions come in.
Oh shoot, I forgot that. I forgot to pause for the questions.
No worries.
Okay, we're gonna take a break then and get to those questions. So yes,
Sure.
I'm sorry, I got going. I get so excited.
Totally fine, totally fine. One participant just asked if we could clarify if the skipper is a butterfly. You did mention that they used a cocoon. You might have used, or may have meant chrysalis instead.
I might have, remember, not entomologists. So yes, they are a butterfly. So they are a group of butterflies called skippers.
Perfect. Another registrant or participant asked if we could clarify the invasive plants in Salter Path. I know you mentioned Vitex as one.
Right. So I've mentioned two that that we have been able to document of concern. The first is beach vitex, which is a problem in many places. It just sort of chokes out natural vegetation. And as far as we know, have not had any documentation that it's used as a nectar plant by skippers. The other is lawn grass, specifically that centipede grass that can, sends out those long runners down into the dunes. So especially where we see at the interface of where we see a lawn and a natural dune, in a lot of places we see that grass kind of going in, and we can't, this is at this point just an observation. We don't have solid data to support this, but we can, it seems that it might be sort of choking out the sea, or at least competing with the seaside little bluestem in some places. Again, that is observational information only, not data collected yet.
Well, that's a great segue into our next question, which you may not know the answer to. Do the plants also adapt to the stepping stone model that the skippers adapt to?
Yeah, that's a real, yeah, I do. I might have to punt to Mike on this one. You know, fortunately, the main plant, the Seaside Little Blue Stem, is sort of persistent, you know, along. But now at this point, I'm going to ask Mike to step in.
Yeah, you know, I think the plants, you know, can the plants can kind of stepping stone along the beach into these different habitats, but plants are going to have a harder time finding their way from large patch to large patch because they can't fly. They don't have wings. So they're kind of relying on the wind to blow their seeds up and down the beach. And if there's a lot of fragmentation and development, they may not be able to do that very effectively, which is kind of where the restoration piece of this story that Carol's just getting into with planting Seaside Little Blue Stem and the degraded habitats is coming in. So yes, partially they follow the stepping stones, but they may need a little more help since they're sessile and don't move.
And we have a question from home gardeners who prefer plants with flowers. Were you able to identify any nectar plants used by the skipper, or is it pretty much strictly the little blue stem?
So that is a great segue into the rest of my talk, which
Perfect.
I accidentally hit a button. And so I'm going to have to get that back now, but I'm sorry about that. I'm going to get that pulled up here again for you.
And we have about 20 minutes for you to complete this story. All right.
Okay, I will get her done.
Sounds great.
Okay, so we had 2 sites that we identified that were of really important restoration need after redoing these surveys. One was the skate park again, because it still had a lot of bare ground and not very much Seaside Little Blue Stem. Baptist had a lot of bare ground, but what we saw is that a lot of those plugs that we had planted stayed. And so while they were small, they were still there. So we felt like it had a good head start. But Emerald Isle really took a big hit. And so this year, or that year, I was able to connect with the landowner there, and we got permission to go plant on her property. And so that, for that reason, we decided to go there. Okay, so in the fall of that year, the first thing we needed to do was to go collect some more seeds. And so this year we got to change our methods a little bit because I had all these great botanists to help me. So we had Sea Grant folks came, aquarium staff came and helped, our conservation horticulturist. Again, we had also Emma from the who is the grower for the botanical gardens. We had Mike come out. We also had 2 interns, Brandon and another girl whose name, I'm sorry, has escaped my mind. And then we were also fortunate enough to have 2 photographers that came with us, Shannon Kemp from the aquariums and Missy McGaugh from the Wildlife Commission magazine, as well as Gloria joined us again as well. At the bottom left there, you can see what a Seaside Little Blue Stem seed looks like. We collected a whole bunch of those. And then Mike and his crew were able to identify some of those nectar plants that we knew what those seeds looked like. And so they collected a bunch of those. Technical difficulties. There we go. So we collected all those seeds and then we sent them back to Chapel Hill to let the botanical gardens do what they do best. And what that is to raise out seeds. And what you see here are the Seaside Little Blue Stem trays that Emma was able to grow out. In addition to the blue stems, we also collected seeds, and she was able to figure out how to grow several other species. So the morning glory, prickly pear, trailing fuzzy bean, dune camphor weed, and horsemint. These were plants that we knew we had some idea that skippers might use, and then also plants that had seeds at that time in the dunes. What we ended up with was about 1,000 Seaside Little Bluestem plants and about 500 of the nectar plants for our next round of planting. But we do know that there are other plant species that skippers rely on, including some of the ones pictured here, but they seem to really prefer sort of the flowers with the yellow and white and purplish pink flowers. October 2020 restoration planting looked a little different. We had a much smaller crew. Gloria went above and beyond to try to get us permission to be able to even do this planting. So we were only able to use planters from our agencies involved. And so you can see Mike and Emma from the gardens, me, Frida, and Georgia from the aquariums, and then Gloria from Sea Grant. We had a few master gardeners that also joined us. Again, we focused our efforts at a private property location in Emerald Isle, which is what you can see here in these pictures. And then again at the skate park. In addition, part of the grant that we wrote was to include some plantings at demonstration sites where we would plant dense clusters of these Seaside Little Bluestem and also the nectar plants sort of in a little garden demonstration area so that the public could see these plants and learn a little bit about this project and the value of native dune plants. And we wanted to do that in some high visibility areas where local people go, not just people that are tourists, but places where we know that locals also use to access the beach. And so we selected the Salter Path Beach Access, which is pictured in is the place that you can see here, Gloria and Frida planting plugs of Seaside Little Bluestem. And then we also have plans to put a demonstration garden in at Fort Macon State Park after they remove some invasive plants, the centipede grass that I was talking about earlier. Both of these sites, we're working on signs to put up that explain the project and have details for people about what we're trying to accomplish. Moving forward. So, you know, every year we've been able to do a little bit more, get a better team, and then plan for what's the next knowledge gap that we need to fill in. So in this spring, my students will be focusing on the tasks that you see here, trying to get a better handle on what are the other plants that these skippers need. So let's put together a list of these plants that are blooming at the same time that the skippers are emerging. Pick a couple of those 8 sites, go out and photo document where we see the skippers actually sipping nectar from, and taking pictures of that, collecting that kind of data, as well as counting the number of butterflies, so just doing butterfly surveys, and then going back to some of those restoration areas and being able to evaluate how well those plugs have been doing, those plugs of the Seaside Bluestem as well as the nectar plants are doing. We also really want to engage more landowners in this. While we were out, we had 5 people that came up and said, hey, please come plant in our yard. We want to support crystal skippers too. So once COVID is passed and we can start engaging with private properties, businesses, towns, and so forth, we really want to be able to do that and maybe identify some local nurseries where we can have some of these plants available for people to plant. At a little bit of a larger scale, I'm also working to use GIS technology and applications to really figure out at a larger scale where we can do restoration. So using aerial imagery of the entire Bogue Banks, let's find out the places where there might be suitable habitat. We don't need to work in the places where the habitat is great. We don't need to work in the places that are completely not gonna, where there's a hotel or a big parking lot, places where there's no chance that we're gonna be able to do any good. So also take out places where there's conflicting interactions, you know, places where we're not likely to get permission to plant, for example. And then use that information to really hone in on areas where we think we can do the most good, where we can bring in even more partners willingly to come and help us and support this little mascot we have for Bogue Banks, our own little species. kind of going back to the very beginning, how does a fish biologist who doesn't know very much about butterflies or dune plants pull something like this off? How do I end up, being involved in this great project and being able to advance this work, this important conservation work? And the answer is on this slide. This is not just a slide, this is a slide full of logos, but it's really about people. It's about the people at each one of these agencies and groups that have supported me, that have given me technical knowledge, like Mike, that have encouraged me and answered my questions, many hundreds of emails back and forth. And then possibly most importantly, at the bottom left there in pink is the locals, the people on Bogue Banks who think this is a special butterfly and who want to keep it here and who support the work that we do. So thank you to everybody that has contributed to this conservation success story for Bogue Banks. With that, I will take a last round of questions.
All right, thank you, Carol.
Did I get it under 20 minutes?
You sure did.
Oh, good. Okay.
10 minutes to spare.
Awesome.
We've had a couple of very kind offers from people volunteering to help document the skippers. One is asking if they can use iNaturalist to document them on Bear Island and Hammocks Beach State Parks.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
So I'm not sure if I posted it, but my email address, is there some way that I can get that posted in the chat box?
We can definitely share that in the chat, and we can also send it out after the fact.
Yeah, anybody who's interested in learning more or wants to let me know if you're documenting these on iNaturalist, that would be fantastic. That would really help. We weren't able to sample there because we had limited access because the ferry was down and all of that. So absolutely. So please feel free to reach out to me through email for any way. And I know we have some locals on the seminar webinar today. So especially if we have people who live on the island who are interested in learning more about supporting this species, please do reach out.
All right. We have one question. What role do the crystal skippers play in the ecosystem, and why is it so important that we do conserve and restore their habitats?
So those are maybe two separate questions. Endemic species are to me valuable because they are so rare. They might be locally abundant, but they only happen in this one special place. So if you think about all the things that had to happen for this one butterfly species, to evolve and occur in just this one little place, it means that they are integrally connected to that environment, which I think is just a real special story. Butterflies play a lot of roles in our environment. We know that they are pollinators. I have no idea if skippers are pollinating these beach plants. I don't know that anybody knows that yet, but certainly they could be serving as pollinators in the dunes. They're also as much as I like skippers, I also like birds. Butterflies are food for lots of other animals like birds and spiders, and who in turn are also important food sources for others. So, you have to think about these animals in the collective whole of the ecosystem where they happen. They all have important roles to play. And we don't know all of them yet for this species, but that's what I'm hoping to be able to explore, especially with my students.
Do you know of any other Crystal Coast species that can benefit from this expanded habitat restoration?
So sure. So there are a lot of species that live in the dunes. There are other butterfly species that might not be just restricted to here. Certainly these plant species are important for a whole host of butterflies and moths and other insects. Many birds rely on this habitat. We have certain snake species that live in healthy dune ecosystems. Just beyond the dunes, we also know if you have a healthy dune system, right, and you can work with landowners to help make those dunes biodiversity friendly, right? We know that those are also places where if you can decrease light pollution and work with work with towns to value these ecosystems, light pollution, decreasing that can help sea turtle populations. So it's not always just about one species. You're doing good for a lot of different animals and plants that live there. I also think that it helps humans, right? So we're part of the ecosystem too. So I think when we have the opportunity to look out across a beautiful set of dunes and see this is a great place that supports wildlife, I think that's good for humans as well.
Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah, I would just add to that. This is Mike. On that human aspect to it, I think there's a really good tie-in not only with biodiversity but just in stability of barrier islands. And you know the shots that Carol showed earlier of the hurricanes and how devastating they can be to people who live there. You know, having healthy dunes and having several sets of dunes that can absorb the impact from storms is really important. And so a skipper seems like an odd carrier of a conservation message, but if that's what carries a conservation message of conserving the dunes is important, I think that's really pretty awesome.
Yeah, what he said, great.
All right, that seems to do it for our questions. I'm going to go ahead and hand this back over to Joanna for some closing words.
Thanks, David. Carol, thank you so much. What a beautiful story. And the bringing so many diverse partners together to make this happen is just a wonderful, wonderful story of what's happening there on the coast. So thank you for taking your time today to be with us. Mike, thank you also for joining us today. And thank you, everybody who's participating, for being here and for the great questions that you added to the conversation today. So please consider joining us for a future virtual Lunchbox talk. We have some coming up in February on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays. David has posted a link to register in the chat. And if you're not currently a member of the North Carolina Botanical Garden, we hope you'll consider joining. And David posted a link for that too. Thank you, David. And again, just thank you all for attending. We hope to see you in the garden, whether you're nearby or far away one day. We hope you'll make your way here. And thanks for coming in to this talk from across the state and beyond. I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again for the invitation to speak. It was really wonderful. Thank you.
So glad to have you here, Carol. Thank you so much.